catastrophe? Watch WION's Climate Tracker weekdays at 12 p.m. GMT, 5:30 p.m. IST.
You don't know how to fix the holes in our ozone layer. You don't know how to bring the salmon back up a dead stream. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. And you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there is now a desert.
You have ignored us in the past and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time.
Show us your faithfulness. Show us your trustworthiness. Show us your honesty. Prove us wrong. We desperately need you to prove us wrong. God help us all if you fail to prove us wrong. God help us.
There are many other. Hello and welcome to WION Live, broadcast from London. I'm Ollie Barrett, and in this bulletin we'll bring you up to speed on stories developing around the world, starting with the headlines. Russia and Belarus begin combat coordination ahead of planned joint drills amid tensions in Ukraine. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson said to hold talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin a day after meeting the Ukrainian president in Kiev. Johnson is set to ask Russia to step back and engage in dialogue. The United States will deploy a guided missile destroyer and state-of-the-art fighter jets to help defend the United Arab Emirates. That decision comes after a series of missile attacks by Yemen's Houthi rebels. The US National Archives says some of the documents handed over by former President Donald Trump to the committee probing last year's Capitol Hill riots had been ripped and torn apart and had to be taped back up.
They're getting into the Capitol tonight.
Beijing detects 32 new COVID infections among games-related personnel as the Chinese capital gears up to host the Winter Olympics. And just 2 days ahead of the Beijing Games, Japan's parliament passes a rare resolution expressing concern about rights issues in China, including the treatment of its Uyghur Muslim population. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, while battling the biggest crisis of his premiership back home, is attempting to show he can lead internationally on efforts to de-escalate Ukraine tensions. He's set to speak to Vladimir Putin later. The conversation was due to happen on Monday, but it was postponed because it clashed with an appearance in the House of Commons to face questions on parties in and around Downing Street during COVID lockdowns. We expect Boris Johnson to urge Vladimir Putin to step back and engage in dialogue to find a diplomatic resolution and avoid bloodshed. It comes a day after Boris Johnson visited Kiev for talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
It is vital that Russia steps back and chooses a path of diplomacy, and I believe that is still possible. We are keen to engage in dialogue. Of course we are, but we have the sanctions ready. We're providing military support, and we will also intensify our economic cooperation because we are a firm and enduring ally of Ukraine and a supporter of Ukraine's territorial sovereignty and integrity. Be in no doubt about what I think President Putin is trying to achieve here. I think that he is trying, by holding a gun, as it were, to the head of Ukraine, by intimidating Ukraine, to get us to change the way we look at something that was absolutely fantastic.
Russians must hear us. They must understand that no one needs a war. There will be a tragedy if the escalation begins. It will not be a war between Ukraine and Russia. It will be a full-scale war in Europe.
Well, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has also held talks with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and urged Russia to immediately withdraw troops from the border with Ukraine. Calling Moscow the aggressor in the current conflict, the White House also rejected Russia's claims that the US is ignoring Moscow's security concerns.
Do we have sympathy? I mean, this is, Secretary Blinken has used some of these analogies in the past, but when the fox is screaming from the top of the henhouse that he's scared of the chickens, which is essentially what they're doing, that fear isn't reported as a statement of fact. And as you watch President Putin screaming about the fear of Ukraine and the Ukrainians, that should not be reported as a statement of fact. We know who the fox is in this case.
Russian President Vladimir Putin, meanwhile, is accusing the West of ignoring Moscow's security concerns and of using Ukraine as a tool to contain Russia. The Russian president says the West's response to Moscow's demands is far from adequate, but he says he hopes solutions can be found.
Russian President Vladimir Putin accused the U.S. and its Western allies on Tuesday of ignoring Russia's security concerns and deliberately creating a scenario designed to lure Russia into war. In his first direct public comments on the Ukraine crisis for nearly 6 weeks, a defiant Putin showed no signs of backing down from security demands that Western countries have called non-starters and possible excuses to launch an invasion.
We already can see that fundamental Russian concerns were ignored.
Russia is demanding that NATO halt any further enlargement, bar Ukraine from ever joining the alliance, and pull back forces and weaponry from Eastern European countries. Putin said Washington is not primarily concerned with Ukraine's security, but with containing Russia.
That is the problem. In this context, Ukraine is just a tool to reach this goal. It can be reached by various means, by drawing us into a military conflict and making their European allies impose against us those tough sanctions the U.S. talks about today.
Russia has massed more than 100,000 troops on the Ukrainian border, and Western countries say they fear Putin may be planning to invade. Russia denies this, but has said it could take unspecified military action unless its security demands are met. Western countries have rushed to show solidarity with Ukraine. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Tuesday met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv and accused Putin of holding a gun to Ukraine's head to demand changes to the security architecture in Europe. He also warned that any Russian invasion would lead to a military and humanitarian disaster.
And there are 200,000 men and women under arms in Ukraine. They will put up a very, very fierce and bloody resistance. And I think that Parents, mothers in Russia should reflect on that fact, and I hope very much that President Putin steps back from the path of conflict and that we engage in dialogue.
Zelensky, who has repeatedly played down the prospect of an imminent invasion, signed a decree on Tuesday to boost his armed forces by 100,000 troops over 3 years. He urged lawmakers to stay calm and avoid panic, saying he had ordered the troop increase, quote, not because we will soon have a war, but so that soon and in the future there will be peace in Ukraine.
And for more on this, let's go to WION correspondent Stuart Smith, who's filed a report from Moscow.
Russia has not managed to achieve what it wanted. The question is whether it uses diplomacy to try and create a suitable compromise, or whether it also involves military action. Russia, of course, has ruled out attacking any other country, including Ukraine. But before these latest statements, there were comments from the Foreign Ministry about military technical measures to be taken if agreement could not be found. And an interesting distinction we're hearing today in Wednesday by the French Foreign Minister, who is giving a completely different picture of the intelligence situation around Ukraine. He says that France is not considering an imminent threat of invasion of Ukraine, which is closer to the position of Ukraine itself, putting it on a very different footing to the United Kingdom and the United States. Notably, Ukraine is not in the NATO military alliance. It's not part of the European Union, but both have been offering support, limited, but support in various ways. The European Union offering over $1 billion in funds for Ukraine to help support it during this very tricky time economically. NATO not committing to sending troops to Ukraine, but some NATO countries have sent defensive and offensive military equipment. Poland, the United Kingdom, the United States at the forefront of that. Also, the Eastern European countries have been sending equipment. NATO and the United States have ruled out actually helping Ukraine militarily should there be an invasion. But the point of President Vladimir Zelensky is that should Russia enter Ukraine, any other country could be next. And so NATO is taking precautions by moving troops to Eastern Europe, countries like Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, which share a border with Belarus. That's notable right now because Russia is undertaking drills with Belarus, and so Russian forces are now close to NATO's eastern perimeter.
Well, back to Boris Johnson, and his government is trying to move on from talk of lockdown-breaching parties at home as well as abroad. Its so-called levelling up strategy is being released. It was one of Boris Johnson's biggest policy pledges in the 2019 election that he won. And now we have some of the detail on how his government proposes to improve the lives of people in forgotten parts of the UK. 12 missions are being set out. They include eliminating illiteracy by refocusing education spending on disadvantaged parts of the country, bringing the rest of the country's public transport up to London standards, providing access to 5G broadband for a large majority of households, and creating more first-time home buyers in all areas of the country, and reducing the number of non-decent rented homes by 50%. The government insists that levelling up is a UK-wide initiative and says it wishes to work with Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland's devolved administrations to achieve it. The Labour Party says the initiative is populist, lacks substance, contains no new money or little fresh thinking. The World Health Organization says a sub-variant of the COVID-19 Omicron variant has been detected in 57 countries. Studies suggest it could be even more infectious than the original one.
Premature for any country either to surrender or to declare victory. This virus is dangerous, and it continues to evolve before our very eyes. WHO is currently tracking 4 sublineages of the Omicron variant of concern, including BA.2.
The Omicron variant was detected in South Africa just 10 weeks ago. Since then, it's spread rapidly and has become the dominant variant worldwide. Omicron accounted for over 93% of all coronavirus infections last month. The sub-lineage of the Omicron variant shows several different mutations from the original one. It's not currently thought by scientists to be more dangerous in terms of severity or vaccine escape.
No indication that there's a change in severity. Omicron overall we know is more transmissible. It has more growth advantage and it causes less severe disease compared to Delta, but it's still a very dangerous virus.
France has begun lifting coronavirus restrictions, including mandatory outdoor mask wearing, from today. The French government's decision has left people divided, with the country reporting record high infections last month. Audience capacity limits for concert halls, sporting matches and other events are being taken away. Working from home is no longer mandated, but is still recommended. Last month, the French government announced a two-part relaxation of curbs. The country in January made vaccination passes a must to access everything from bars to restaurants to long-distance public transport. The second stage of lifting curbs will see nightclubs reopen on February the 16th, and standing areas will be again allowed at concerts, sporting events and bars. Eating and drinking will also be permitted in stadia, cinemas and public transport. Authorities in France view the threat of Omicron as limited and less dangerous than previous strains, even though it is more contagious. And as the world continues to grapple with COVID-19, a major byproduct: thousands of tons of plastic hospital waste.
Discarded syringes, used test kits and old vaccine bottles from the COVID-19 pandemic have created tens of thousands of tons of medical waste, a World Health Organization report said on Tuesday. It says the material is a threat to both human health and the environment, potentially exposing health workers to burns, needle stick injuries and disease-causing germs. Communities close to poorly managed landfills could also be at risk through contaminated air from burning waste, poor water quality or pests. His WHO technical officer, Dr. Maggie Montgomery.
We found that COVID-19 has increased healthcare waste loads in facilities to up to 10 times current volumes. And if you consider that 2 in 3 healthcare facilities in the least developed countries didn't have systems to segregate or safely treat waste before the pandemic, you can just imagine how much burden this extra waste load has put on healthcare workers, on surrounding communities, especially where waste is burned with the release of dioxins and furans.
Montgomery also says a misconception about the rates of COVID-19 infection from surfaces was to blame for what she called the overuse of protective gear, particularly gloves. The report calls for reform and investment, including by reducing the use of packaging that has caused a rush for plastic, and for protective gear made from reusable and recyclable materials to be used. The report mentions some 140 million test kits with the potential to generate over 2,866 tonnes of mostly plastic trash and enough chemical waste to fill 1/3 of an Olympic swimming pool, as well as personal protective equipment the equivalent of the weight of several hundred blue whales ordered through a UN portal, most of which is thought to have ended up as waste. The report did not name specific examples of where the worst build-ups occurred, but it did refer to challenges, like limited official waste treatment and disposal in rural India, and large volumes of fecal sludge from quarantine facilities in Madagascar.
Japan's parliament has passed a rare resolution expressing concern over human rights issues in China and has asked the government to take steps to relieve the situation. The moves provoked anger from Beijing.
これまで新疆ウイグルの人権状況等に対しても日米首脳会談や G7 等の場を含め、我が国として深刻な懸念を表明するなど、我が国と価値観を共有する国々とともに連携しつつ取り組んできています。ただいまのご決議の趣旨も踏まえ、政府として引き続き国際社会と緊密に連携しつつ、着実に取り組んでまいります。
The resolution adopted by the lower chamber says human rights issues cannot just be domestic issues because they're universal and therefore a concern for the international community. Japan had already announced that it will not send a government delegation to the Beijing Winter Olympics. China has pointed towards Japan's own history, saying that it committed countless crimes when Japan launched war against other countries. The US has banned some imports from China over concerns about forced labour and has labelled Beijing's treatment of the Uyghur Muslim minority as a genocide. China denies abuses in Xinjiang, which is a major cotton-producing region that also supplies much of the world's materials for solar panels. The latest coup in Burkina Faso is the fourth in Africa's Sahel region in less than 18 months. It followed military takeovers in Guinea, Mali and Chad. While the West has raised concerns, and there are fears that military takeovers could destabilise the region further, some civilians have welcomed the military interventions, criticising the governments for her failure to tackle Islamist insurgencies.
The last time soldiers attempted to overthrow Burkina Faso's government, Sultan to the street. That was 2015. Within days, loyalist forces had restored the president to power. This time he was welcoming new military leaders and celebrating the coup that ousted a democratically elected president.
In the situation of Burkina Faso, at the moment it is necessary to be clear. We need a military regime. In 6 years, what these gentlemen have done to our country is serious. Is one of integrity.
He's democracy here. His view fits into disenfranchisement across West Africa's Sahel. Militant violence has escalated over the past decade. Thousands have been killed, millions displaced. Under-equipped armies have has largely fallen on civilian administrations, who have also been tarnished by public perceptions of corruption. Emboldened by popular support, militaries in Guinea and West Africa shared its image as a coup belt. Aziz Diallo is the mayor of Dori in Burkina Faso's northeast. The town has tripled in size, he says. Nearby villages. Because of insecurity and death threats, he spends most of his time in the capital, Ouagadougou.
One must oppose this coup d'etat, but the context in which they are has taken over the values on which they are based. It is this feeling of anxiety and despair that has made this coup welcome as a source of hope for a better future among this battered population.
States. They have troops in the Sahel fighting instability. But for those caught in the middle of the bloodshed...
The first ever exhibition of self-portraits has opened here in London into the life of the Dutch post-impressionist prolifically in the last few years of his life. That story, see you tomorrow.
artist, actually, I think we don't realize that, made as many self-portraits as Van Gogh did. He made 35 in the space of only 3.5 years. That's really quite unparalleled in the history of art. And so we wanted to understand what it was about this genre that appealed to him so much. And actually what we found is that it was a wonderful way of charting his artistic development over those 3.5 years. It was the end of his life, but it's really the moment that he came into his own and became the Van Gogh that we know.
He's a very distinctive looking person, and you can really see that in all of his self-portraits. And you can see in this exhibition, there's lots of different styles, and they weren't painted that far apart. You can see very realist paintings, you see pointillist paintings, you can see this signature style that he's known for. They're all in this exhibition all over the course of 3 years. And it goes to show what a diverse talent he was in terms of his painting style, but also what an iconic painter he remains today.
Many other